So eager to play, so reluctant to admit it.
Created by Clive Barker, the Hellraiser franchise is one of the most popular horror series of all time, and it went on to inspire several video games, comics, merchandise, and so on. Barker could not have imagined the impact of his novella, The Hellbound Heart, when he first penned it down, but he created a world full of complex personalities that soon won over the audiences. From the classic Cenobite monsters to other singular entities such as Pinhead and Butterball, today we will explore the top 10 characters who shaped Hellraiser's legacy and tell you all about them. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
I am the way.
1. Pinhead, the Hell Priest. Famously known as the Hell Priest, or the lead Cenobite, Pinhead single-handedly led the Order of the Gash and wreaked havoc in Hell. He was often called the Black Pope of Hell, but his story started all the way back in the Victorian era. Also known as Elliot Spencer, Pinhead was born in England in 1887, and he joined the British Army and served in France during the First World War. All the loss of life in war led him to lose his belief in humanity, and he had a bad case of post-traumatic stress disorder. He then started wandering the earth and leading a hedonistic lifestyle until he stumbled upon the lament configuration and understood the real meaning of pain and suffering. He then turned into a Cenobite, and he would often appear to the residents of suburban areas, who would often give him sacrifices in exchange for hellish inspiration. Over time, Pinhead established the Order of the Gash and unofficially assumed the role of the leader of the Cenobites while continuing to appear to human beings such as Kirsty. Of course, this was only the film version of the characters, as the novels do not introduce a single lead Cenobite. Over the novels, Pinhead's gender was also left open to interpretation, with phrases that described his voice as light and breathy and flesh as pale white with deep grooves that ran all across his head. Eventually, the films introduced him as a man, wherein Doug Bradley portrayed him in 8 consecutive films. 2. Chatterer. Introduced as the last follower of the original Pinhead Quadrant, Chatterer is also known as the Angel of Suffering or the Blind Sadist. He was the 4th Cenobite in the Lament configuration, but he had already seen a whole lot of the world by the time he transformed into this devilish creature. Also known as Jim, Chatterer framed his mother after killing his abusive father at quite an early age. He was then ushered off to an orphanage, where he often engaged in homosexual relations before going on to become a prostitute at the age of 16. In his interactions with one of his clients, he was handed the Lament configuration, and he then started worshiping the god of pain and desire. In a few years' time, he stumbled upon his ex-boyfriend from the orphanage and learned that he was punished by their solicitor for Jim's decision to leave. The two ended up getting intimate, but his ex soon used the configuration's powers to convince the god of pain and pleasure to transform Jim. Soon enough, Jim's body was horribly disfigured, and he turned into a summoning angel with clicking teeth. He eventually assumed a new identity as Chatterer and joined Pinhead's Gash, where he came across Janice Bauer. He then gave her the Lament configuration so that she could create the shape of pain, but she was soon sent to Hell, where Chatterer tortured her alongside other Cenobites under the guise of improving her acting skills. He first appeared in the Hellraiser movie alongside other Cenobites as they threatened the Cotton family, and Chatterer especially dealt with Kirsty on several occasions as she offered to trade her soul and eventually even made her way to Hell. In the second movie, Chatterer reverted to his human form after Dr. Channard killed him, and he later appeared in the 2022 Hellraiser reboot. Many alternate versions of the character have also appeared in Hellraiser, Hellseeker, and Hellraiser Inferno, and the creators also introduced a female Chatterer in Hellraiser Revelations.
Steve.
3. Butterball. Also known as Laszlo, Cenobite Butterball was known for his sadomasochistic torture methods among other members of Pinhead's group. In fact, he had earned a reputation as the main torturer in the team, and he took great pleasure in sin. He turned into a Cenobite when he first arrived in Hell and stumbled upon the puzzle box, and he soon managed to solve it all on his own. He then dedicated years of his life towards working under Pinhead's Order of the Gash, and he was an obese, bald bald character who first appeared in Hellraiser after Frank Cotton solved the puzzle box. In no time, Butterball tried to torture him and the others, but Kirsty soon managed to send him back to hell when he tried to play his usual tricks. He later returned in the sequel when Kirsty and Tiffany made their way to hell, and he was among the many Cenobites who were killed by Dr. Channard and trapped in the Pillar of Souls. Even though he was still trapped in the Pillar in his latest appearance, he's rumored to be a part of the Hellraiser remake as Gil. Butterball's main aim as a Cenobite was to serve Pinhead and Leviathan in any way he could, and he mostly did the dirty work of killing, torturing, mutilating, or assaulting their victims in mass numbers. He was also capable of teleportation, and he proved to be quite a resilient character who could not be easily defeated. 4. Deep Throat. Initially introduced as an extremely beautiful woman, Deep Throat was soon cursed after she stumbled upon the puzzle box. In fact, she was a nun known as Sister Nicoletta, but evil forces kept calling out to her as she was tempted by lust. Soon enough, lust turned into an obsession, and she could barely control herself when a man who stayed with them gifted her the Le Marchand box. He had sensed that she was worthy of being a Cenobite, and Nicoletta also did not turn away from this temptation as she opened this box. In no time, the Grillard Cenobite jumped out of the box and triggered her transformation into one of their kind. In fact, he supposedly even used her body before finally dragging her to hell, where she became known as the fierce virgin demon in the Order of the Gash. She worked closely with Pinhead and eventually assumed the role of High Priestess of Hell. Undoubtedly, she was quite an evil force, and most beings were too scared even to utter her name. It was said that anyone who discovered her true nature did not make it back alive to tell the tale, and she was an uncontrollable, ruthless entity with a sharp, razor-like tongue. Any interaction with Deep Throat was likened to the most painful torture methods in hell, and she managed to maintain an elusive presence across her story arc. At some point, Deep Throat was sealed in the Pillar of Souls by Dr. Channard, but Pinhead managed to resurrect her in a few decades' time. Deep Throat typically appeared in a black leather outfit with mutilated body parts, and she was best identified by her bald head and nail piercings that branched across her entire face. She also had a deep incision on her throat, which helped her maintain her characteristic whispery voice. 5. Angelique. Formerly known as a priestess of the Labyrinth, Angelique was known as a demonic ruler of hell and the daughter of Leviathan. Sometime around the 18th century, Angelique was summoned to the mortal world by Duke de Lille, an occultist magician who had gotten his hands on the Lament configuration. He had also killed a young woman while performing a ritual to connect Earth and Hell, and he finally succeeded in summoning Angelique as a demon servant who took control of the dead woman's body. However, Lille's joy didn't last very long, as his assistant, Jacques, also retained some control over Angelique and ordered her to kill Lille and Philip Le Marchand. About 2 centuries later, Angelique finally killed Jacques when he refused to let her investigate the Le Marchand heir John. She then went to New York to look into him anyway and realized that he had somehow created a new portal to hell. She then forced him to solve the puzzle box in the hopes that it would summon reinforcements from hell, and was surprised to see Pinhead emerge from the portal. He informed her that things have drastically changed in hell, and they then forced John Merchant to use the building as a permanent portal to hell. They also turned a pair of twins into Siamese Cenobites, summoned the Chatterer to capture John's wife and son, and finally decapitated John. While their mission was mostly a success, John's wife somehow broke free and sent them all back to hell, and Pinhead then turned Angelique into a Cenobite as punishment. She remains the only demon-turned Cenobite in the franchise's history, and her attractive features underwent some changes as she lost her hair and her scalp was peeled back and secured in place with the help of wires and hooks. She also had hooks on the sides of her body, and she had swapped the Cenobite robes for a tight leather dress. She first appeared in Hellraiser Bloodline and was portrayed by Valentina Vargas in the movies.
Our girl. And how are we feeling today?
6. Philip Channard, Dr. Cenobite. Also known as the Doctor, Philip Channard was the main antagonist of the 1988 Hellraiser sequel, Hellbound. Introduced as the head psychiatrist at the Channard Institute, he soon developed an obsession with the occult and eventually resurrected Julia Cotton by feeding her corpses. From there on, he dug deeper into the world of the Leviathan, especially when a teenage girl, Kirsty Cotton, started telling him about the Cenobites. Over time, Channard even traveled to Hell through the Lament configuration, and it was only a matter of time before he was turned into a Cenobite. Moreover, Leviathan scanned his mind and learned that he used to dissect animals as a boy and that he was responsible for a young woman's death. After turning him into a Cenobite, Leviathan compelled him to chase after Kirsty and Tiffany, and it was Pinhead who finally stepped between them and prevented him from killing the two girls. In a fierce battle between Pinhead's team of Cenobites and Channard, the latter managed to free himself and even kill 3 Cenobites before turning Pinhead into his human form. While Kirsty and Tiffany make a narrow escape, they realize that they need to close the puzzle box in Hell to stop Channard from following them, while Leviathan also severs his connection with the Doctor by tearing his head apart. While Channard played a crucial role in turning several Cenobites into their human forms, he had a short-lived story arc, and he never managed to return to Leviathan's hellish realms. 7. The Gasp. Introduced as the major antagonist of the 2022 Hellraiser reboot, the Gasp was portrayed by Selena Lowe. She was the second in command after Pinhead, and she served the Leviathan with complete dedication. The Gasp was also tasked with the responsibility of torturing the souls who were unwillingly lured into the labyrinth by Riley McKendry. She was best known for her torture methodology, as she made her victims writhe around in pain before finally mutilating them. She was a demonic sadist with extremely high immunity to pain and powers such as immortality and teleportation, and it's often theorized that she used to be human with a traumatic past. Eventually, she stumbled upon the configuration box and was subjected to torture and mutilation before she finally turned into a Cenobite. From that point on, the Gasp was determined to torture any living beings who dared to enter the labyrinth, and she was famously known for sticking a needle down Serena Menaker's throat before subjecting her to torture for eternity. She also had the ability to perform elicidokinesis, which helped her summon thin, barbed wires out of thin air to mutilate her victims. She used this ability to torture Trevor and Colin, and she was last seen warning Riley about her sufferings in the future before gifting her the Lament configuration. The Gasp was devoted to serving Pinhead and Leviathan, and just like most Cenobites, she took great pleasure in teasing and taunting her victims. She also loved announcing her love for pain and suffering, but she did keep her word and refrained from torturing any victims who struck a deal with her or Pinhead. 8. The Surgeon. Portrayed by Dale Wilson and Mike J. Reen, the Surgeon appeared in Hellraiser Hellseeker, where he was first introduced as a human named Deacon Vranian. He was a reputed surgeon, but things went downhill after he accidentally killed his wife during a surgical procedure. Deacon then blamed himself for her death and drove himself to insanity, until, finally, he stumbled upon the Lament configuration box. He immediately solved it, and Pinhead emerged out of the box and offered him a way to forget everything that had happened. He was then transformed into a Cenobite known as the Surgeon, and he had barbed wires wrapped around his head and a striking suit of armor. He also appeared alongside other Cenobites when Kirsty solved the box and entered Hell for the 3rd time, and he was present at the scene when she offered to trade 5 souls. Alongside other Cenobites, he observed her as she opened the box to deliver these souls, and Pinhead even tasked the Surgeon with the responsibility of retrieving the first victim. 9. Siamese Twins. Also known as the Bloodline Twins, the Siamese Twins Cenobites had quite essentially merged, which made them unlike other Cenobites in history. Their origins can be traced back to the 1990s when they worked as security guards for a Lament configuration museum. Also known as Mark and Michael Bradley, they guarded this exhibit that was created by none other than Le Marchand's descendants, and were taken aback when they heard some noise in a private section of the museum. As they rushed to the room, they accidentally walked in on Pinhead while he was talking to Angelique, and Pinhead then sensed that they were afraid of being separated from one another. He then merged their bodies and sent them to Hell, where their bodies could be shaped professionally by the engineers, and the Siamese Twins then accompanied Pinhead on many of his adventures. Just like most Cenobites, they were mute, and they never uttered a word as the other edges of their mouths were pulled over with hooks. They did not have arms, as they were crushed in the process of merging, and they wore leather outfits with a diamond-shaped cut. Their faces were twisted in a way that each one looked in the opposite direction, and their facial appearances were inspired by Greek theater masks that symbolized comedy and tragedy. These Cenobites traveled alongside Pinhead, Chatterer, and Angelique to outer space in 2127 to witness Dr. Paul Merchant opening the box. Even though these Cenobites were confined to a private room, these twins managed to sneak around the space station until they ran into Angelique. At this point, Angelique separated the twins and then placed Captain Edwards between the two before reattaching their bodies in a way that they crushed and absorbed Edwards' body. The twins then hunted Rimmer and Dr. Merchant until they reached the Elysium configuration. But unfortunately, they were killed off in an explosion along with Pinhead and Angelique, while the door to hell was sealed for eternity. 10. The Engineer. Introduced as the manifestation of Joseph Thorne's cruelty in Hell, the Engineer was formerly a Cenobite that Thorne had hunted for quite some time in Hell. Over time, the Engineer established himself as the main antagonist of Hellraiser Inferno, and even killed Daphne, Thorne's parents, Bernie, his wife, and daughter. He would also leave a child's finger next to all of his victims' corpses, and he believed that he was punishing these people for all the sins they had committed. When Thorne finally confronted him, the Engineer tried to shoot him, but Pinhead stopped him and even hooked his hand by a chain. The Engineer then revealed that he was a manifestation of Thorne's cruelty and proceeded to kill his younger version. Meanwhile, Pinhead skins Thorne's head and kills him entirely, who then realizes that he's now stuck in hell for eternity and that the Engineer and other such demons will continue to haunt him. Marvelous verdict. And with that, we've explored some of the most iconic characters who shaped the Hellraiser franchise and made it into the world-famous phenomenon it is now. From our primary antagonist, Pinhead, to some more underrated characters such as the Surgeon and the Engineer, this franchise would not be what it is without even one of these interesting personalities. We hope you enjoyed exploring their origins and story arcs with us, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.